Good morning, adventurers. My name is Ben, and welcome to a morning show where I sit around, drink some tea, and talk about D&D. So for step 14D today, we have our Stone Creek Coffee pink and light blue unicorn / narwhal mug. Again, one of my favorites. I really like it. I honestly wish I had more similar shape to it, but I don't. I just have the one. And inside of it, we have some chai black tea from Private Selection. This is either like Target or Kroger brand. I don't remember which one. I've had this box of tea for like a very long time, so I don't remember where it came from, and I can't remember what. I don't know. I can't remember most things anyway. It's fine. Not the point. Anyway, getting into what we are talking about today. Today's episode was suggested by and then voted on by my patrons. And I am very excited to get to talk about this one because it is something that I have kind of been meaning to talk about for a while, but not. I haven't necessarily had the exact opportunity to. And I'm going to expand on what they asked for just a little bit because I feel like I can more effectively talk about the slightly expanded version than I can about the super specific version. So, what they had asked for was talking about using older editions of the game as inspiration for your current 5th edition game, or I guess using any other edition of the game for inspiration for your game, depending on what edition it is. You could do this 3.5 from 5 or something like that, or 2 from 5, whatever. And I'm going to take that, I'm going to build on it a little bit, and just talk about adapting from other games into 5th edition. If you are interested in being able to suggest different show episodes that you'd like to see, and being able to vote on what this end of week episode ends up being every week, head on over to my Patreon. There's a link to that in the description below. But with that said, let's get into talking about adapting other editions / other games even into your... We're talking 5th edition because that's the one I know, that's the one I'm familiar with, that's what the whole show is based on. So, we're talking 5th edition today. Into your 5th edition game. So, first thing is first. Whether you are adapting from another game or from an older edition of D&D, there is one major thing you are going to have to remember. That major thing is that you are not necessarily, pretty much ever, going to be able to pull the mechanical effects directly from that game and drag and drop them into your 5th edition game. They're just, it's just not going to happen. In the event that you do have a game that uses a D20 system, the same way that 5e does, even then you are not necessarily going to be able to drag and drop because it does not have the same set of rules. I want to make that clear. This is going to be about, like, adapting something from another edition into your actual game. We're good? We're clear on that one? Great. So, getting into it then, there are a wealth of other tabletop RPGs out there. I have and have played quite a few of them, and by quite a few of them, I mean a tiny drop in the bucket of the larger TTRPG sphere. But I do have some that I have played and I have really enjoyed, or I have some that I have read and really enjoyed reading about. I guess if you want to hear me talk about those at some point, let me know, and I'll work those in at some point here. But this is mostly D&D stuff. So, if you are looking to adapt something from another game into your 5th edition game, the best way to go about doing so is to find a rules equivalent. And so what I mean when I say that is, if you're looking to adapt something from an older edition or from a different game, you need to take what the mechanical benefit within that system ends up being and transferring it over and finding something that does an equivalent or adjacently equivalent, I guess, thing in 5th edition. Because when you do that, then you have a better idea of the actual scope that you're trying to work within. I have not gotten to play this one specifically, but I know that the Fantasy Flight Star Wars role-playing game is fantastic. I have several of the books. I've read them. I really like the system as a whole. It is hard to grasp without playing it, I think, and so I really want to play it at some point here. But my good friend, Brooklyn Tuesday, has played it quite a bit and really likes the... believe they're destiny tokens or fate tokens or something like that that you get in there. And she wanted to adapt those over to a 5th edition game. And so, for anyone who doesn't know what those are, is they are essentially like little luck tokens that are laid out as a community sort of thing that are two-sided. One of them is light, one of them is dark. And the light ones are to be used by the players, and the dark ones are to be used by the DM, or vice versa, or GM, I guess, in the game. And if you want to like utilize some, or like the way that she described it to me that she had played it with in her game was if there was something you wanted to change in the game, you could use one of those to a degree at like the DM's discretion. So if you wanted to say retcon something to say, oh, we had planned out this like signal that we could use, you could flip one of those over from the light to the dark, so that then the DM had the opportunity to do something like that against you. You could also expend one for like advantage, or expend one to give somebody else disadvantage, or something like. They're like luck points essentially that you can use as story beats as well, or as like part of story planning as well. And so she was like, oh, well, we can just swing this straight over to 5th edition. And with something like that, she is actually pretty much correct. It's not. It is not often that you would find something that is outside of a mechanical like crunchiness that you would be able to do that with. But this sort of thing, you could go, okay, yeah, so we have 1 per player, or everybody rolls a d4, or everybody gets 2 of them to like contribute to the pot or something like that. And then you go from there. Now, if you are looking at something from, say, 2nd edition or Pathfinder or something, and you are looking at an item or something like that, and you go, man, I really want to go ahead and make this an item in my game, you're going to have a little bit more of a problem than these Destiny Point token things. An example of that I have actually used in-game is that I created something called Bond Hoops for my game, because at one point I was at a friend's house and they had a like Pathfinder book of magical items. And so I was flipping through it and I was like, oh, these are pretty cool, because Pathfinder fascinates me. I don't know that I would like it all that much, but I really like having a bunch of stuff to look at and like numbers to play with in my brain. And I know that it's a slightly different system and everything like that, but I was flipping through and there were these, I don't remember what they were called at this point, but they were these 2 rings that were about like dinner plate sized, and you could use them as like a mobile portal gun kind of thing. Like you could put one here and then put one here, and then you could reach through one and come out the other one. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. How do we bring that over to 5th edition? And so then I had to sit down and I had to figure out like what it was that I was actually trying to do. It was essentially like a miniaturized arcane gate that you could put over here and over here, and it was item based, and there was a lot going on there. And so I spent probably a good hour or so searching through stuff, through D&D stuff, to try and figure out what the equivalent was, which I did end up finding was like Arcane Gate or something like that. So I was like, okay, so I want to duplicate this enchantment but put it on an item so that it is constant or activated or something like that, as opposed to being a spell that you cast. And so I spent then another little while figuring out the best way to kind of balance that out, while keeping it at the rarity that I wanted. It was going to be a very rare item, so it was going to be a relatively powerful enchantment. I think I decided on it lasting for a minute twice a day or something like that. It was something pretty similar to that, where there were 2 charges that regained 1 every day, and you could activate it for a minute, something along those lines. Because, I mean, having something like that is a very, very powerful magic item given the right circumstance. And so that was me taking something from Pathfinder 2e and porting it over into D&D. Now, it is messier because Pathfinder does have a lot more like very specific rules with how certain things work, including something like this, whereas 5th edition does not have as many hardcore rules on the subject of, you know, like portals that pop up around places and how to use those. So those are the kind of things that you have to think about as a DM, where you are trying to port something over like that. Those things being the holes in the rules of 5th edition that you are going to have to patch yourself. So 5th edition is not a rules-light RPG by any stretch of the imagination, but it does not have nearly as many hyper-specific rules as games like 3.5 or Pathfinder or something like that. Or honestly, even like Cyberpunk or I'm blanking on all the others, like The Witcher, something like that is based more heavily on like specifics and designated values to different things. 5th edition, while it is still a pretty rules-intensive game, and by pretty I mean very rules-intensive game, it does have a lot more sort of like hand-wavy wishy-washiness, because you're distilled down into your ability scores, followed by the skills, and past that, you kind of make a bunch of random stuff up as you go along, or there are weird rules thrown in here or there. Without the hyper-specifics of these other things, again, like portals that you can like open in different places, which is why you have to dig through the 5th edition rules to figure out what it is that you are actually trying to replicate. If you cannot find anything, you are then responsible for figuring out how to fix that hole, essentially. And in order to fix that hole, you kind of have to figure out how rules that are similar to it work. So had Arcane Gate not been a spell, for whatever reason, had it been something else, it would have been similar to, if you're using it to attack or like reach through and do something, it would have been similar to trying to essentially like pick a lock or attack through jail bars where things will have cover or things will be imposing disadvantage on you for some reason or another. If you're using it to like pass items through, and it's a little bit more teleportation-y. And so you're going to have to sit there and sort of cobble together your weird amalgamation that you have adapted. But that's kind of how homebrewing goes anyway, so adapting is not that far off from just creating your own homebrew a lot of the time. Because as much as we all like to think we're super original people, super original creatures, homebrewery is stealing from other stuff pretty much always. It is very, very rare that you find something that you haven't accidentally, unconsciously, or very consciously stolen from some other piece of media. And that's just kind of the way it goes, honestly. It just is how it happens. And there's nothing wrong with that. The whole point of the game is to, like, tell the story you want to tell. And oftentimes you want to tell stories similar to the things that you actually like. No judgment here. But in terms of adapting things from other systems or other editions, if you are stealing something from there, I guess borrowing is a better word because you're not actually stealing it, you do need to make sure that you are kind of, I'm going to say respecting, but it's not really respecting. It's honoring, it's minding, quote unquote, all of these things, the original intent within the original set of rules as well. So if you were to port something from a less wargamey system, so not Pathfinder or 3.5 or something like that, and you were to port something from something like Kids on Bikes or something like that, that is going to be something that you have to be familiar with the different outlook that the rules of that system actually have before you actually try to port something over, because the reason that something from those kind of games will work in that game is also the reason that it will not work as written in a 5th edition game. Kids on Bikes specifically has a powered ally kind of thing, because you're playing teenage, like you're playing kids. I believe you can play adults. It's been a little bit since I read the rulebook, but I believe you can play adults. But like, you are playing children ultimately, and you have the ability to play collaboratively as part of like a powered character, which is something that everybody controls a different aspect of. It's kind of like a Jaeger from Pacific Rim, to a degree. And so that is a lot harder to port over to 5th edition than, say, an item from a similarly wargamey, because D&D is ultimately a war game. All the rules are about fighting, really. Similarly wargamey set of rules. But that doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means that you have to very clearly understand the intention behind the original game in order to port it into this game that you have also a very good intentional understanding of the rules on. Because if you don't have a solid understanding of how the 5th edition system works, you might run yourself into a lot of very bad problems with keeping everything balanced and moving and straightforward, because you might start introducing rules that don't need to be there. You might accidentally start introducing like mechanics that will just bog everything down, and that does cut down on the pace of the game. And 5th edition is really balanced around pacing, whereas 3.5, Pathfinder, that kind of thing, are balanced around numbers instead. Pacing is important, obviously, and numbers are important in 5th edition. You know, same, but they are balanced around those things more than the other. So if you're looking to port something like that Powered Ally, make sure you have a very, very good grasp on how it is supposed to work in the original system so that you can make it work the right way in 5th edition. I think that is pretty much everything that I have on that one. So to recap, find something you like, scour 5th edition for any similar ruling at all, like anything at all, in order to actually be able to port it over, and have a good understanding of how the thing works in the other system or other game, especially if it is something coming from a vastly different system. Like Powered by Apocalypse games, which is not Kids on Bikes, they will have a much weirder time, I guess. Not necessarily harder or easier than like a Kids on game or a Pathfinder game, but a weirder game because they use a similar set of mechanics in like DC, standard rolling, everything like that, plus modifiers, but it's a different way it works. So just do your research on it. And honestly, I would just Google stuff too. Like, see if somebody else has tried to port this over, because if they have, then that's going to save you a lot of work outright. And you can take those rules, tweak them to fit the style that you are looking for a little bit more, and then you should be having a much better time. Okay. So hopefully that answers that question. Moving on from that, we have shows that we have this weekend. We've got a big old list because it's the weekend. We always have a pretty hefty list on the weekends. I am out of focus, not the point. So starting with Friday, we have Mayhem D&D, Off the Rails, Oxventure, Just Roll With It, The Strings of Fate, Rolling with Difficulty, World of Low, The Crown DM, and Coming Together Naturally. On Saturday, still our lightest day, we have Dice Funk and Strange Hungers. And then on Sunday, we have Super Idols, Roll For Your Life, Grinning Griffin, Dungeon Drunks, Library of Nightmares, The Chaos Brigade, Rise of the Forsaken, Chromatic Dice, The Strodcast, and High Rollers. Please go check those out. Please let them know that I'm the one that sent you, because, again, someday somebody will say something about it, and it will be funny to me. That's the only reason. But with all that said, that is everything I have to talk to you guys about today. So thank you very much for making me part of your morning routine. I really do appreciate it. And thank you so much in particular to my patrons. You guys are the ones that make this show possible, especially for episodes like this. You guys are the ones that decided on what this episode was going to be. So if you're interested in becoming one of my patrons and suggesting episodes and voting on episodes, go check out my Patreon. Link is in the description for that. I believe that is everything I have there. So with all that said, don't forget, everybody, drink tea, play D&D, and keep on rolling.